Before we begin, a few disclaimers. I saw Dune just a few hours ago. I am very exhausted and will take a nap soon. However, I will try to be as exhaustive as possible within a short review. This will be non-spoilerish. It will be open to mainly introductory intermediate people, but I will soon do more minor spoiler and full spoiler videos. Watch out for those and get into it. So, what is Dune? If you're completely new, essentially Dune is the story of a war between House Harkonnen, though they're called Harkonnen in the film, and House Atreides. The main focus is on Paul Atreides, who has several different identities throughout the film. But what is Dune the movie about? Well, if we had to get down to it, it's basically a film about a quartet or quintet of individuals. The story is mainly about Paul, his father, his mother, Duncan Idaho, an ally within House Atreides, and the Baron, although the Baron really doesn't appear that much, and the love relationship between these characters and love-hate, obviously, with the Baron. And the question is, what did Denis do with this? Well, most of the film is really two films. It's the Jessica Paul film, and there's reasons why Leto, the father, does not appear that much, and the Duncan Paul story. And two guesses, which I think is the strong one. Most of the film is the Paul Jessica story, and that's fine. But the much more interesting story is the Paul Duncan Idaho story and how it's linked to the Fremen and Arrakis. So the central conflict here is control of the spice on Arrakis and its powers and its role within the larger empire. But in terms of what Denis focuses on, it's really the coming of age of Paul and his responsibilities within House Atreides. And this is, I think, is where we're going to get splits among the fandom. I think the first third, in terms of the music and filmmaking, was solid. The second third was intermediate, but it's very mixed. A lot of great stuff, but a lot of major problems and flaws. Finishes very strongly in the final third, and the music I think is the most powerful. The characters make a lot of sense, but there's still a lot of flaws. Nevertheless, it does end on a pretty high note, but it's very confusing and puzzling, even if you know the books. And that's basically the story of Dune, the film. It's just very, very mixed. It goes from really big high, great, awesome, amazing, to mediocre, to abysmal, back to okay, back to great, and then back down. And it literally has this kind of very roller coaster structure within its own narrative. Part of the confusion is that Paul can see visions into the future, but not just one future, but possible futures. I think this is going to confuse people right away. What we see sometimes in scenes are not in the film's narrative. They're just the visions Paul has, and he decides to make a different choice. So we see what would have happened if he made one choice, but then we see what he does make a choice, and that becomes part of the main narrative. So you have to pay attention to when we're in vision narrative versus the real narrative. And that's kind of the same problem with the music, that sometimes the music is very appropriate. It makes sense within the main narrative, but then sometimes it has no relationship to the narrative. Sometimes it's hostile to the narrative, and sometimes it's just plain baffling. I'll give one example. There is a scene, and yes, it's playing. A person comes out with bagpipes, and bagpipes, of course, are in the actual music. Aside from being just very annoying and frustrating, because again, visually, cinematically, this is mostly great. Sound is great. The music is very mixed, but the music is always very loud, so the bagpipes are inescapable, so that was annoying. But this is kind of symbolic of the whole film. The guy with the bagpipes just disappears. And this is happening when there is a sandstorm. And so you think to yourself, wait, what happens to this person? Did they get killed, or they get lost, or they just disappear? And that literally happens for the majority of people in this film. They just disappear. So we see Stilgar very early on. He's good. He's great. He's kind of a aloof dick, basically, an asshole, but that's his role. And then he just goes away. Literally just goes away. Tufir, a Mentat. And we'll never know what Mentats are, by the way. He's got a couple of scenes, but it's the same story. Tufir appears when he appears. Peter appears when he appears, and then they just disappear. Now, with Peter, at least, we know something happens to him. But with Tufir, we don't know. Is he dead? Did he get captured? Is he on vacation? We don't know. And that just keeps happening over and over again because plot threads, subplots, interesting character development happens, but then it stops. And the focus just keeps going back and back to Paul and Jessica and or Leto and or Duncan Idaho. And even though I don't like this version of the Baron, I think he was effective. He's not the book Baron. He's a Denis Villeneuve kind of version. That's fine. The problem is lack of proportionality. So we get a lot of these central characters, but sometimes they're boring and repetitive. I literally lost count the number of times Jessica keeps crying and becoming emotive about Paul and his visions. I think, no lie, They go through the same identical cycle with just few variations 3 times at least in this film. I'm probably like underestimating, probably like 5 in totality. And so scenes that could have been devoted to the other characters and really fleshing out the world and universe keep just going back to Paul and Jessica. And it's after a while, it's like, I don't care about Jessica. I really don't. Timothée does a really good job with Paul, so I didn't mind going back to him. And his central conflict is really powerful. Like, how do you deal with this? You have this vision where, yes, you'll have these powers and you'll liberate a people, versus you're going to unleash a genocidal jihad. So overall, the Paul story is done well, but when it's linked up to the Jessica story, it falters. When it hooks up with the Idaho story, it's really well done, but a lot of the other elements are very mixed. So the strong points are the costumes, the makeup, the Baron looks terrifying. The sound design is mostly good, but when it's mixed with the music, it starts to become bad. The sound is 90% good, but then the music is very erratic. Sometimes very well done, but sometimes it's poorly done. Mostly it's just very oppressive and noisy. And it's not even new. Hans Zimmer prompts something new. This was very repetitive from his old works. That is the visual cinematic experience. It's overall very great, but filled with tons of flaws. Some of these flaws are minor, some of them are major. Most of them are minor, but they are critical. So there's too many bad things to give it a perfect score. So it's not a 10 out of 10. On the other hand, people give this an 8 out of 10. I don't appreciate how much work and effort Denis did make into trying to make the world plausible. A lot of things do get time, like the Bene Gesserit, but we really don't know that much about. This really only gives us a really small snapshot into the Dune universe, but I think it's a very vigorous attempt. It's not a failure. I think 8 out of 10 would not be giving enough credit to the massive effort and sincerity. And yet, when it's great, it really makes up for that. So when the music is well done and the performances are very powerful and synchronized with what he's doing visually, it's very good. But then there are just too many puzzling moments where camera angles are weird, pacing doesn't make sense, dialogue is self-contradictory. So a very mixed bag, but way more good than bad. It's one of the best films of the year. I think one of the best of the decade, but I think this is going to be more number 9, number 10 of the decade. It's not in the league of The Shining or The Snyder Cut or one of these massive milestones, but it is a genuinely great film. It's a little weaker than Denis Sicario, but stronger than Blade Runner in my opinion. It's a masterpiece, well worth seeing in theaters, but it's very mixed. Don't feel bad if you are mixed about it. It is a very mixed picture. When it's great, it's great, but when it's bad, it's bad. And when it's meh, it's meh. But overall, a very stunning achievement. Please see it, please support it, but we're going to be disputing this for a very long time. So thanks for listening.